A lot of teams hear internal developer platform and they immediately think new portal, new dashboard, new interface. But that is probably not where this is going, because the real problem was never just we need another place to click. It was always too much friction, too little context, too many handoffs, and too much time between idea and production. And now, with AI and coding agents starting to change how work gets done, that question gets even sharper. If developers are spending less time clicking through dashboards and more time working with agents, then the platform layer has to change too. It has to become less about UI and more about context, automation, and safer paths to action. Hey, I'm Brian. I work in DevOps and SRE, and I run Teller's Tech. This is Ship It Weekly, where I filter the noise and focus on what actually matters when you are the one running infrastructure and owning reliability. Most weeks, it's a quick news recap. In between those, I do interview episodes with people building tools, running teams, and thinking hard about where platform engineering and DevX are actually headed. Today is one of those conversations. I'm joined by David Chute, founder and CEO of Roadie, a managed internal developer portal built on Backstage. And this one is really about what IDPs are for, how teams should think about them, and how that changes as agentic workflows become more normal. We talk about the difference between a platform and a portal, the three big problems teams are usually trying to solve with an IDP, why adoption is often more of a human problem than a technical one, and why a lot of teams should start with automation first, not just a service catalog. We also get into self-hosted Backstage versus managed Backstage versus more opinionated SaaS options. What trade-offs actually matter there, and why the future may be less about single pane of glass dashboards and more about packaging the right context for humans and agents at the moment they need it. And maybe my favorite part of the conversation is that David does not really answer this from a hype angle. He keeps bringing it back to something a lot more useful. Talk to your users. Define the real problem. Solve what painful is, and do not build a platform strategy around a fantasy version of the future. If you like these kinds of conversations, follow the show wherever you listen, subscribe on YouTube, and check out shipitweekly.fm or tellerstech.com for more episodes, show notes, and everything else that I'm building. All right, let's jump in. Today, I'm joined by David Chute. He's the founder and CEO of Roadie. Roadie is a managed internal developer platform built on Backstage. And David's got a strong take on where IDPs go next as coding agents become normal. David, thank you for joining me.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I've been kind of around the IDP space since its genesis, I guess, about 5 or 6 years ago. I was originally a software engineer and then an infrastructure product manager at Workday. We built a IDP internally inside Workday before IDPs were a thing, before Backstage was open source, before companies like mine existed, obviously. And so we kind of learned some of the lessons through that process. We experienced the pain points of why people want to have an IDP. And when I say IDP, what I mean is internal developer portal, as opposed to platform. But yeah, we experienced the pain points of why you would want one in the first place. And kind of that was the what gave me the impetus to start Roadie originally.
Give me the thought behind platform versus portal.
Yeah. Well, the way I differentiate them is kind of around the goal of what they're trying to provide. So platform, I think about being deeply integrated, like vertically integrated throughout the stack. So it's not just the visualization of, well, what's running and where and so on, but it's also the orchestration. It's what is deployed where, how do I move it to something else? And it'll try and control that entire stack. Whereas a portal, I think, and this is not necessarily true, but as a general rule, is a thinner layer which is trying to sit more broadly across more of your stack. So, and how this manifests itself really is with a platform, you often have like a pretty high initial setup cost where you literally have to move everything onto the other platform. Whereas a portal should be more able to kind of work with whatever you've got, integrate with the tools that you already have, and just give you a unified interface across all of those tools.
So if a team was deciding between self-hosted Backstage versus a managed Backstage or another IDP, what signals do you think matter most?
So, I mean, well, let me maybe take it back a step, if you don't mind, and talk about why you would want to have a developer portal in the first place. So, because if you can answer that question first, it's usually a good place to start when it comes to, which solution should I have, right? But typically, and this is I recommend that people do this all the time, but I try to define the problem first.
Hmm.
And so what I see out there in the marketplace, and this has been broadly true, I think, for the past 5 years that Backstage and other technologies have existed, is three different problems or three different categories of problems, I would say. So the first one is that what I would call the discoverability problem. People feel like there's too much software, there's too many humans producing all of this software, and it's just difficult to answer basic questions about, where are the bills for the XYZ service? Does it even have bills? Who would I go to ask in the first place? And obviously that extends to, or the complexity of those questions is multiplied by the number of different tools that you're using, the number of services that you've got, the number of humans, and so on. And so that becomes a problem in and of itself. And really, what you're trying to do there is get the right context to the right humans at the right time. And we'll talk about this later on, but that problem is probably changing quite a bit as we become more agentic. The second category of problem is around speeding up the path to production.
Hmm.
Really like speeding up the time it takes to from an idea in a developer's head to a service which is actually running in production. There's typically, I mean, back when I was at Workday, we had a 40-page Confluence document full of checklists that you had to go through. Teams talk about ticket ops a lot. Most operations require opening a Jira ticket against the platform team and waiting for it to be done. You want to kind of take away all of that and essentially provide self-service automation to the developers who are running their software on the platform. And then the third category of problem is really about putting guardrails in place to ensure that software which is running on the platform meets a certain set of requirements, right? So this can be simple things like, if you want to have your software running on our platform, you should have a README in the repository, right? And it can extend to far more complicated things around using the correct Docker base image, let's say, of that the platform team has just released to run your software on the platform. And really, that's about improving homogeneity, trying to make it a more consistent environment in the platform to improve reliability and stability and speed. So those are the three kind of ways that people typically explain their problem when they originally come to me, and that's the job of an IDP, is to try and solve one or more of those problems for a team. Does that make sense?
No, totally. So, with those three areas of focus in mind, is there a overwhelming majority, like common problem statement that you see over and over again?
Yeah, yeah. Well, they typically always have the discoverability problem, right? So they'll have that problem first, and then they'll have one or more of the other problems. Now, it varies a bit in terms of size of company, right? So, firstly, for IDP purchasers, they're typically 100 engineers plus. Like that's the kind of minimum size of company. Now, we do have smaller customers, and there are smaller teams out there who want IDPs, but to really be successful or really have the pain that an IDP can help you solve, you want to be 100 engineers or larger, right? Because you want to have a certain
Yeah.
size, certain amount of complexity, in order to be able to, in order to need to purchase a platform or a portal to solve the problem. But after that, it's really kind of maturity specific, or it depends on the maturity of the team, right? A lot of the time, if they're a new platform just getting started, or if they're trying to migrate from a legacy platform to a new platform, then the top priority for them will be the automation pieces. It will be speeding up the path to production because that's pertinent for the job, the initiative that they're trying to complete at that time. We see a lot of teams also who are moving, let's say, from Bitbucket to GitHub, or Azure DevOps to GitHub, or something to GitLab, etc. And so they want to provide automation to their teams in order to speed up that migration. And so they'll be less interested in the catalog and the discoverability pieces, but they'll be more interested in the automation pieces. So it depends a little bit on what the initiative is. And that's kind of why one of the first things I'll often ask teams when they come to Roadie is, what is the initiative? Why is now the right time to bring in an IDP? Why wasn't it 6 months ago? What's going on in the company? And really that informs the IDP that you choose, the features of the IDP that you want to roll out first, and how you want to use it and how you want to communicate it to your teams.
Cool. So I know that I want an IDP. I've figured out that problem statement. Maybe I need a service catalog or I want that automation. How do I decide between port, roadie, backstage? Where do I start?
Yeah. Well, I mean, regardless of which platform you're going to have to choose, and there is a way to think about that also. You want to think about how you're going to get it into the company or how you're going to drive adoption of it throughout the company, right? So I mean, this is often much more of a human problem than a technical problem, I think, and people underestimate that. So if you take a simple question, you're going to want to have a catalog in your developer portal. That's typically the piece where a lot of the functionality hangs off. You go and look at a service, and then you can see who owns it, or you can redeploy it, or click a button to do something, right? Um, so how are you going to populate your catalog is one of the first things that I would suggest that people think about. The two paths that you have there are some sort of automated population where you're essentially going to connect it up to GitHub and pull in the repos and connect it up to Argo CD and pull in the applications from there, and form some sort of relationship between those two things. Um, and that's going to be good for catalog completeness, but it's going to be poor for giving the teams a sense of ownership over how their service is represented in the IDP, because they'll feel like you just did that work and it's nothing to do with them really. The other end of the spectrum maybe then is Backstage's kind of traditional YAML files where you're asking teams to put a
Mhm.
YAML file in their repository and maintain that over time. Um, which is the other end of the spectrum. It gives them a high sense of ownership, but it's going to be less up to date. There's going to be a lag between changes happening in the real world and changes being represented in that YAML file. And there's going to be a slower rollout there because you're asking teams to do something. But those are both ways that we've seen be successful. But even beyond that, you have to think about, well, what is our data model in this company? And that can often be a hard thing to pin down in the first place before you even try to define that in YAML files or in code or whatever, however you're going to do it. You can get your architects in a room and talk to Bill and talk to Mary, and the two of them will disagree about what constitutes a service in the company, or is the payment service part of the payment system or the billing domain, or what is the nomenclature that we use to describe the company, right? These are all things that need to be decided at a human level before you can dive into choosing your IDP, I think. You would be surprised, or I think a lot of people who maybe work in smaller companies would be surprised at the level of chaos that exists out there around some of these operations in larger companies. We have plenty of customers who can't answer a simple question like, "What's a team?" Right? If they go to Workday, they'll see one definition of who's on a team. If they go to GitHub Teams, they'll see another definition. And these things mean they're not incorrect. It's just that in different contexts, what you would call a team is slightly different. Maybe your manager in Workday is a certain person, and so you are in that team, but you're also on call for a service which is actually owned by a different team, and so you're kind of in that team too, right? And so the messiness of human environments really takes a toll when it comes to organizing your data model and keeping everybody happy. And so I do think that teams should think deeply about how they're going to do that before they get an IDP at all. Other good things to think about are what is your first feature, right? Or like, what's the first problem you're going to try and solve with your IDP, which I think is it can have a large effect on whether or not the initiative is successful. So, we often recommend that teams start with the automation use case in Backstage-based deployments or in Roadie. The reason being that catalogs have network effects effectively, right? When you take some time to build out your catalog, and in those initial stages, when people go to visit the catalog, they're not going to see the things that they need. And so they're going to be discouraged from adding their own software. It ends up being a bit like a social network, like Facebook or anything else. Whereas automation has immediate ROI, right? If you can take a process that used to take a month and you can make it now 15 minutes, then you can very easily multiply the amount of times that process is run by the time saved. And then you can easily explain that to your VP of engineering and claim a win and take that forward. There's no waiting period before you achieve that benefit. So we recommend people start there a lot of the time, of course, taking into consideration the actual needs of the organization. If you don't have a need for automation, don't start there, obviously. But then okay, so after all of that happens, you've decided that you do have a real use case for an IDP. You've thought a bit about how you want to roll it out and so on. The market, I like to think about, kind of divides itself on a spectrum of extensibility to ease of use or speed of deployment, let's say. So At one end of the market, you do have self-hosted Backstage. It is, and let's be clear, self-hosted Backstage is the market leader. Like probably 90% of the market is using self-hosted Backstage. There's 3,500 companies out there who have adopted Backstage, from the largest companies in the world to small teams of 10, 20 engineers. The thing to keep in mind about Backstage, though, is that it's a framework for building a developer portal. It's not a developer portal
Yeah.
itself. It's kind of funny to think about, but back in the early days of the Backstage community, I noticed that there was a trend of people searching for Backstage Docker container or Docker image on Google, because people were looking for not a TypeScript library, bunch of TypeScript libraries that they could build together into a developer portal, but they were looking for a Docker container that they could just run. And
Mm.
so one of the first things that we did in the community was actually just build that Docker container and make it available. But that was a long time ago. Things have moved on quite a lot from there, but the core nugget of truth is still true. Backstage is a framework for building a developer portal. You mentioned just before we started the call that Spotify had said that teams should be 6 to 8 engineers dedicated to Backstage to be successful for it. Our data shows the same thing, really. And we ran a survey last year called the State of Backstage, and when we analyzed the data from that, people who reported being very satisfied with their self-hosted Backstage deployment had at least 3 engineers dedicated to it. That's kind of what we saw across the market. So that's all true. Time to value you're expecting to see is 6 to 12 months. But this may have changed recently with the development of AI. Probably has come down in the past 3 months. I feel like Opus and improvements to Codex have really increased what AI can achieve. So that might come down a little bit. But the core work that you have to do is still there. It's about going and talking to your internal developer community, distilling what they need, turning that into features. A lot of that work you still have to do. Building in things like role-based access control, which doesn't come with Backstage out of the box. This is all kind of boring stuff that I think at least we would claim that your engineers are better off not doing, and just using a kind of existing solution instead. But you do have Backstage, self-hosted Backstage. That's at one end of the spectrum. It's going to be the most extensible thing that you can get, no matter what your internal tools are, no matter how homegrown or legacy they are. It's going to be able to integrate with them because you basically build your own developer portal. Then at the other end of the market, you have Cortex, etc. Really, what you're trading off there is control for reduced time to value. So you're going to get more features out of the box. You're going to get things like scorecards, role-based access control, built-in AI, etc. All those things are going to come out of the box, and you're going to be able to just use them on day one. And then what you're trading off is, in terms of control, is vendor lock-in, restrictions to the amount of integrations that they provide. You kind of are locked into their roadmap, same as with any other SaaS solution, limited customizability, etc. But it's going to be more opinionated. You're going to get started more quickly. And so that's a path that you can go, of course. And then Roadie is slightly different, and I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch for Roadie, but just to explain, because we are based on Backstage, we give every customer a full Backstage stack, but then we build in the kind of ease of use that you need on top of it. So, instead adding integrations is just a matter of drag and dropping things around the place. There's no the redeployments. We give people search, which is based on open search, role-based access control, scorecards, etc. All those things are built in. So the idea really is just that you're getting the extensibility of Backstage, but you're also getting the ease of use and the reduced time to succeed that you will get with Port or Cortex.
So, speaking to the automation angle, how do you think agentic workflows change IDPs or how they may be implemented going forward?
Yeah, I think, we're in the middle of a massive shift right now. I don't know how much how much you're perceiving it, but I still am hands on keyboard writing code whenever I can, which is typically just my spare time. But I'm making small changes. I'm not allowed. The engineers don't allow me to make changes to the actual product anymore. But I hack on our marketing website whenever I can, and I haven't written a line of code in maybe 3 months or so, since Christmas, I would guess. Everything is produced by Claude, so there's a massive shift happening right now. I think that IDPs existed to try and bring information from external sources, LaunchDarkly, CircleCI, whatever tools you're using, into one UI so that you could have a kind of a single pane of glass experience. That's what people would talk about a lot. I think that the need for that is shifting. At least I feel now like I want to be in my terminal or in Visual Studio Code or whatever it is that you're using all of the time. And I feel like the information can come to me. So I think that's one huge shift which is happening. Like, why would I go to a catalog and click through an interface to find a service to be able to see a piece of information when I can just ask the question
Hmm.
directly in my terminal? So I mean, that's how I think the shift is being pushed onto the market. And so the UI layers of IDPs, I think, are becoming less and less relevant over time. So that's one change. And then the other thing that we're seeing, and we're a little bit earlier in this, but the more and more work is being done by agents. And I don't just mean when you're in Cloud Code and Cloud Code is an agent, but I mean an actually externally triggered, hey, something went down, an agent fires and makes decisions about what to do about that. So these are operations decisions. It could be, add a second cluster or something, right? Whereas we're earlier in that, but my expectation certainly is that that is going to become more and more prevalent over the next 2 years or so as we can trust LLMs more and more. Um, Obviously, it's a lot riskier, but the earlier stages of that, I think, are humans or humans building working directly with LLMs quite closely to answer questions. I mean, take an example of something like figure out why the payment service went down last night between 3 and 4 a.m., right? Like, that's an actual use case from inside in Roadie that we were discussing recently. But if you think about the context that's required there for the agent to be effective, it's what is the payment service? Where is the logs for it? What log group? Like, where's the metrics? Which cloud? What region? Etc. There's so much context that an agent needs to be able to be successful. So I see the job of IDPs shifting a little bit from providing context to humans through UIs that they can click through to providing what I would call context bundles to agents so that they can have historical data if they need it, real-time data if they need it, concise, accurate, correct, to be able to make decisions about how uh, certain changes in the environment should be reacted to.
So building like a centralized MCP for all information around the development cycle?
I think that can certainly be part of it. Yeah, that will give you the kind of real time access to. Well, let the agent ask a question to be able to get a result. Right. I think that's certainly part of it. I think that I'm not sure that that solves the entire conciseness part of the problem, and it certainly doesn't solve the kind of historical data or what has changed over the past hour part of the problem. But certainly that will be involved. Yeah, for sure.
So if coding agents make dev faster, why wouldn't DevX teams suddenly have time to build whatever, everything?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess like I would be the engineer in me would be hopeful for a world where they would, but the I guess the CEO in me is not necessarily sure that that's how it's going to pan out. I mean, it certainly does make it easier to make changes, faster to make changes. That's irrefutable at the moment. But I think that that doesn't necessarily mean that a internal platform team is going to have all the time in the world to build whatever they want. I worry that people in the C-suite are going to look down at that team and think, well, okay, well now we can actually take 2 engineers off that team because everybody else is more productive and put them on the revenue generating side of the business, right? I still think that that fundamental tension between the revenue generating side of the business and the platform team or the internal teams still exists, and I still think that trade-off exists, and so it's not necessarily clear to me that you're going to have more time to work on internal projects. I still think that even with AI, I mean, the return on investment equation does change, but I still think it's difficult to prove the benefit of that or prove that return on investment to the executive level. So this is a challenge that we deal with a lot in the IDP space because IDPs are at their highest level supposed to improve productivity of developers. But we're not even all that good. And I mean, when I say we, I mean the industry at large is not all that good at measuring productivity of developers in the first place. So showing a delta between where it was before and where it is now is even more difficult. And I still think that that's going to be true as well for internal projects, even with AI. Now, you can obviously claim the cost is reduced, and that's true, but the cost reduction mostly shows up in the front of the application build out lifecycle, right? So, it's easier to get started. It still gets a bit slower to improve software over time, or it's still slower than it is to start a greenfield project. I mean, we see this with Backstage upgrades internally, right? One of the benefits of Roadie is just that you don't need to upgrade Backstage anymore. But AI is not all that good at upgrading a sprawling Backstage application, making changes, broad changes across the code base. And so that's still going to be true if you build your own software. Scope is going to increase over time. Um, and you're going to have to do wide changes internally, and that's still, I think, going to be difficult. So, and then the other large source of waste that I see inside software engineering organizations is not necessarily not building the thing fast enough, but it's building the wrong thing in the first place. And I still think that that's going to be a problem. I don't think AI necessarily tells you what to build or how to solve the pain points of your users. And so one of the benefits of I think picking off the shelf software is that it's built out of the lessons which have been learned over many, many years from rolling out at lots of different companies and solving all sorts of problems that you don't necessarily want to slow yourself down by having to reinvent the wheel, solve those problems again.
Yeah. So, okay, given that it sounds like we're moving from dashboards to workflows, IDPs become the source of truth for context to some degree, which I think is an organic move. What should teams do now so they're not rebuilding everything again in 18 months? Like, how do we prepare?
That's the $1 million question. I wish I had the answer to that myself. It seems like everything you put on your roadmap might get released by Anthropic 6 months from
Mhm.
now and might disappear, right? I think you have to stay close to your users. I have to, and I feel this too, right? Because as a startup founder, you somewhat have to live in the future, right? You're trying to keep track of what's happening out there in the world and what's coming in the next 6 months. But I have to go back and put every idea through the filter of where are our customers now? And and I think that internally, if you have internal customers, which is what a typical platform team has, I think you need to keep that in mind too, right? Like, what are the needs of the business right now? Where are my users? What are they capable of? What does our security restrictions and our governance rules and everything else allow us to do? And kind of build for now with an eye on the future. I think, I guess some myself, I still think that developers are going to be around for quite a while. And this is again just pure speculation on my point. No, my part, nobody really knows, but I certainly feel like the human and AI loop is quite important and will be for the next while. I think we'll be augmented by AI. I think it's a bit like having an exoskeleton. You get stronger, you get better, you get faster, but I still think that the creativity part exists and will do for quite some time.
The State of Dora Metrics report end of year last year. I thought it was interesting. They talk about how engineers in general say that they're getting more productivity out of AI or with AI, but yet we're not actually seeing like more tangible deployments or like feature rich work being deployed. Where engineers think that they're getting more out of AI, but they're maybe not, or at least not as quickly as we would think that they should, maybe with the efficiency gains.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, this is again just personal thoughts. So frame this however you want. I think that it's tempting to do more busy work now. I think is the first thing. Like things that where you wouldn't necessarily made that feature before, but now because it's easier, now you will. But that doesn't necessarily add to like the bottom
Mhm.
line, the overall productivity. I think that developers who are able to make product decisions have gone up in value a lot over the past 3 to 6 months as well. Because again, the AI won't tell you what to build; it will build it faster. So I think if I was going to give advice to someone who's starting out in software engineering now, it would be to try and be a well-rounded individual who knows some UX, who knows some UI design, who understands why people use the software, because then you can kind of build towards your customer and you can actually solve problems in a very real way for people versus just moving code around, which I think is a risk. And I think there's also there's a general economic diffusion problem that we have to solve at the moment as AI just percolates through the economy over the next couple of years. So, I mean, an experience I had recently was we had a full company offsite. And we're a remote company, so it's rare for people to all be in the same room together. But we got the technical people in the same room as the non-tech. When I say non-technical people, and I'm if you're not on camera, you can't see that I'm doing air quotes, but the air quotes are because I feel like everybody's a bit technical now. It was eye-opening for some of the non-technical people, people in customer success, people in sales, etc. Eye-opening for them to see what the engineers were able to do in a very short amount of time with AI. Um, and I'll give you a great example. I mean, one of our customer success people went took the lessons from that offsite, just kind of, it was more, and when I say lessons, it was more of an eye-opening experience. It was just oh wow, that's what you can do. And once he'd been shown what was possible, he was able to go back, and he's never written a line of code in his life, but actually make his own customer success dashboard, which
That's
pulls
cool.
information from lots of different sources and shows the health of each of our customers, etc. So I think there's a certain amount of just realization of what's possible that has to happen throughout the economy. The models don't need to get much better, although they will, but the knowledge has to percolate through the economy, and I think that that's when we'll see the real productivity gains.
Yeah, it's almost like we're all becoming managers now, and we're all like the skill set is really knowing how to prompt an AI, but then also how to be critical of the output of the AI too. Like because
Yeah.
it's very good at being confidently incorrect. So if you don't give it the context, like you said, it's going to make assumptions. So you have to know how to actually reason about what it's giving you, and then be able to give it the right input so it gives you the output that you're expecting.
Yeah. And just because you can build anything and everything doesn't mean you should.
Yeah,
We've all used bloated software. I mean, it's one of the top complaints of people who actually produce software when software is bloated. But AI can help you make your software bloated much more quickly than you could before.
very true. Okay, so wrapping up, what's one piece of advice for platform or DevX teams starting an IDP this year?
Put your laptop away and go talk to your internal users.
That's
Um,
fair. Yeah.
right? Go and ask them, hey, what are you doing for 90% of your day? What's the biggest frustration you've got? What takes the longest time? Because you might find out that it's actually, well, the bills are slow or whatever, right? And it's not that they're trying to search for who is the owner of the payment service, or who's the manager of that team or whatever else. So I think go talk to your users. That's the number one piece of advice. If you actually are in a situation where you want to have an IDP, or you have a need for an IDP, I would suggest trying a little bit of self-hosted Backstage, try a pure SaaS solution, and try Roadie, just so that you get a good overview of the market, right? An IDP is something that you are going to roll out across your entire organization. You're going to live with it for quite a while, and so you want to put some thought into that decision. It's not necessarily the most reversible thing in the world. So I think just take a look at a couple of different solutions and see how they each perform.
Yeah, that's fair. Where should people follow you or read your stuff?
I am probably most active on LinkedIn, which I'm almost makes me shudder to say. The inner developer in me hates that, but it's
Yeah,
probably true. So just search for David Chute on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's probably the best place.
very cool. I'll leave all that information in the show notes as well. David, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Super. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, that's my conversation with David Chute. My biggest takeaway from this one is that the future of IDPs probably is not build a prettier dashboard. It is building the right context layer for developers, for platform teams, and increasingly for agents. That means discoverability still matters, automation still matters, guardrails still matter, but the shape of the experience is changing. Less clicking around for answers, more workflows, more context delivered where the work happens, more systems that can help humans and agents make better decisions faster. I also liked that David kept this grounded. He was pretty clear that teams should not start by chasing hype or by building towards some imagined 18-month future that may change again in 6 months. Start with the pain you actually have. Talk to your internal users. Figure out what slows them down. Figure out what causes friction. Figure out what should be self service. Then build from there. This is a much healthier way to think about platform work. And honestly, it is probably the right way to think about AI too. Because just because we can build faster now does not mean we automatically know what is worth building. If you enjoyed this episode, follow Ship It Weekly wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want the full show notes, links to David, Roadie, and the resources we talked about, head over to shipitweekly.fm. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you later this week.